You know, one of the things that the AAPS believes, and I believe, is that medicine is between a doctor and a patient, not between a doctor and a government bureaucrat and a patient. Now, our next speaker this evening is Ralph Weber, who you heard this afternoon talk about insurance, but really, you notice he had a Canadian accent. He's going to talk to you tonight. His talk is The Road Through Socialism. And he moved to the U.S. after he had trouble getting medical care for himself and his family in Canada. Ralph Weber, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heeb. I'm really humbled tonight to be standing in front of such a great group of people and to open for the great Professor Maltsev. But the doctors in particular that are standing up for patient rights, that's your most important battle. That's the most important fight. Because coming from Canada, where patients didn't have rights, I saw it firsthand. And there's nothing worse than living in a society where the government regulates your health as a method of getting compliance. But it happens. It does happen. It's very unfortunate. I left Canada 6 years ago. And first of all, what I'm talking about tonight is the road through socialism. And it's very important to understand because we hear people all the time talking about why do Canadians allow the system in Canada to work? Okay, why do they stand for it? Why aren't they complaining? Why does the media continue to get all these people that say it's not bad? Now, first of all, it really isn't a bad system if you don't need it, okay? It's not. It's just when you need it that you find it doesn't work. And there's three other things in life that you need to be able to trust before you need them. A parachute, a fire extinguisher, medical care, and the other one is toilet paper. They need to work before you need them. Okay, so it's just not good enough. I left Canada 6 years ago, and this is the road through socialism, of course. The center of socialism is Saskatchewan, where they grow a lot of wheat, and the home of Tommy Douglas, the founder of Canadian Medicare. And they call it Medicare in Canada, but it covers 96% of people in Canada, not just the seniors. But this is one of the two reasons that I left Canada. If you see the foot on the left, you'll see it's kind of, pointing a little bit, and you see that scar. These are my wife's feet, and she waited in Canada 2.5 years for a bunionectomy. 2.5 years. It wasn't life-threatening, so she waited and waited. And the specialist, as I said earlier, I'm not joking, they shut down in October. They've seen their patient allotment, they shut down, they go to Arizona. No more patients, because it's rationed. So for 2.5 years, they gave her a cane, they gave her a walker, they gave her Vicodin, they gave her everything but the treatment. Now, she's an American citizen. She came up to Canada to live with me, and she said, I'm out of here. You can come with me or not. And I decided it's not worth my health. And we went to California. We had it done for $2,800, that scar right there. She now has it's not a bionic toe, but it's a titanium toe. And every time we go through the airport, she gets the enhanced pat down because her toe sets off the machine. The other reason I left is my son. Now, you can probably guess which one is my son. He's the one on the right. My son, Rick, is 6'7", and he's now going to Suffolk University in Boston studying for his PhD in economics in public choice theory. He was accepted to George Mason, but he got a better deal at Suffolk. He tried to play basketball in high school. He tried to play basketball. The first year he tried out in his freshman year, he was too late. He missed the tryouts. The next year, they said, if you didn't play last year, you can't play this year. In his sophomore year, he tried again. We hired a coach for him, and he played, and he worked out, and this kid consumed 6,000 calories a day. And he's still skinny. And he worked out like crazy, and we got him a coach. And then he went to try out, and they said, we're not letting tall kids try out because they always have an advantage in basketball. That is the truth. That is Canadian socialism. There's no such thing as an athletic scholarship in Canada, so the coaching staff is very low quality. But we want to give the short kids a chance. You know, we wouldn't want the tall kids to stand out. Another nice kind of, symptom of socialism, they're actually right now forming a prisoners' union. One of the first cases to be heard by the grievance committee is, we don't like the horizontal stripes, they make us look fat. So they're going to take that to the grievance. A prisoners' union, come on. Now everybody in Canada knows, if you need medical care, go to prison, because they get it. They get it in prison. You get first-class medical care. The prisoners, the politicians, and the professional athletes are the only ones that are exempt from the health bill. They can get quality health care when they need it. And there are people in Canada, the homeless people, they arrange to get jailed in November for about 3 or 4 months, get their teeth fixed, get new glasses, study law for a few months. They're working towards their degree. And then they get out during the nice weather and they live on the streets, This is socialism. I was in Canada 3 weeks ago, and I attended, this was just before the federal election, just not even a week before. The Liberal Party of Canada, and in Canada there's 4 official parties. There's the Conservatives, there's the Liberals, there's the New Democratic Party, which used to be the Socialist Party of Canada, and then there's the Bloc Québécois, which is kind of a conservative, but they only represent Quebec, and they only talk about separation. The Liberal Party, somebody went up to the lectern and said, my granddaughter just died waiting for an organ. What are you doing about this? And they said, well, actually, we've been thinking that since we pay for all your health care, your organs are Crown property. So they're toying right now with mandatory organ donation. So if the Prime Minister needs a kidney and you're a match, you got 2, you don't need them. They're coming for you. Okay? And the sheeple put up with it. Okay? But I lived in Canada for 29 years. I grew up in Thailand, Nepal, and Germany, and then I came back to Canada when I was about 14, 15 years old. And I lived there for 29 years before I moved. And it's like boiling a frog. It happens so slowly that you don't see it. But now that I'm away, when I go back once a year, I see the stark contrast. I see the meanness. And I tell people, when they ask me, where do you come from? It's a hard question. I was born in Vancouver. My parents are from Germany. I spoke German my whole life. I grew up in Thailand and Nepal. I live in Tennessee. Where do I come from? Well, I come from the future, and I come from the past. I come from the future because Canada is what Obama wants to do here. That's what he wants. That's the future. I come from the past because how many million people did they have to kill in the Soviet Union to prove that socialism doesn't work? In China, in Cuba? It doesn't work. So I come from the past. I come from failed policies of the past. The doctors initially supported socialized medicine. Some of them did. They had a doctor strike in 1962 in Saskatchewan, but initially they supported it because the way it was sold to them is you don't have to worry about billing people. We'll collect their money and we'll pay you. You don't have to worry about all that paperwork. Wow, great deal. Okay? Now, keep in mind what I said earlier. It was doctors that invented Blue Shield. And it was hospitals that invented Blue Cross with the same promise. Okay? And now, all these years later, that we're seeing downcoding and all this other stuff, there's a new sales pitch. Well, single payer is better. Government medicine, we'll get more people insured because those uninsured, they cost hospitals $49 billion. So we'll force them to pay, and we'll pay you. And there are some doctors that believe it. Himmelstein, Comrade Himmelstein's group. What is it? Doctors for Socialized Medicine? Something like that. They buy it. Okay? So, universal health care is actually completely unattainable. It is just as impossible as changing gravity, to fall upward. It can't be achieved, and here's why. What it promises is it promises universality. Every patient will receive the same amount of care. Well, it just so happens that the 60-year-old diabetic who's overweight and smokes needs more care than the 23-year-old athlete. So you can't do that. You can't do that. Okay? And what happens is the young start to resent the old because they're taking too much out of the system. And the young taxpayers have to support it. And they say, what are we paying for this? My mother, who's going to be 80 years old this year, her friend Teresa, just in January of this year, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. She'd been going to the doctor for 2 years with rashes. And they said, oh, it's just a spider bite. It's just poison ivy. Rashes on her legs, on her chest. And they wouldn't even look at her. It's just poison ivy. Just go home. Finally, my mother dragged her into the hospital. Stage 4 breast cancer. My mother's other friend, Ona, who goes to the government liquor store every day and gets 2 cans of beer. She doesn't get a 6-pack because she'll drink it. She buys 2 cans. She's in the lineup at the government liquor store, and the clerk says, what's wrong, Ona? You look really, really sad. And she said, well, my friend Teresa, who's 6 years younger than I am, was just diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, and there's nothing they can do. And I'm 84. Somebody in the lineup, 3 people back, behind Ona, said, lady, if you're 84, you ought to be dead instead of costing the rest of us. Now, we all know what would happen if that happened here. Boom. Okay? No, they all just stood there like sheep. Yeah, he's right. Okay? That is the meanness and nastiness of socialism. And the socialists that accuse the capitalists of greed, they're looking in the mirror, okay? Because it is that greed that's talking. So we can't actually achieve universal health care. It's an impossible goal. The resentment goes deeper. It goes worse than that because in Kelowna, British Columbia, where my mother lives, it's a city of about 100,000 people, but the whole Okanagan Valley is about 250,000 people. There's one dermatologist serving 250,000 people. And when she went on maternity leave, and in Canada, by the way, you get a year maternity leave for both spouses. Okay? So she's off for a year. There's no locum tenens. The seniors had to go see veterinarians for care. And the vets, because in Canada, the average doctor makes $89,000, primary care physician, the average vet makes $170,000. So that's where the bright minds are. Okay, they don't become medical doctors anymore. They know the single payer system doesn't work. Okay, now, today, there are 2 single payer systems in the world, only 2. There's a lot of socialized medicine, a lot of government medicine. There's 2 single payer. Canada's one of them. And what I mean by single payer is that it is illegal to pay a doctor for a covered service, just like it is on Medicare here, practically, okay, except that, there's opted-out physicians. Anybody want to guess who the other country is? No, not Cuba. They used to be. North Korea. Canada and North Korea. Single payer. Good partners. So in British Columbia, on the West Coast, you can't find a primary care physician, so you go to the government walk-in clinic. And when you're seeing a different doctor every time, what is it? Okay. When you see a different doctor, I don't have to tell you. You know this. There's no history. You don't know the history. You see a different doctor. They order a test, which you're going to wait 2 years for. Okay. You're not going to get them. Okay. But that's your primary care doctor. It's like this giant government-run ACO. So now, of course, I'm going to talk a little bit about some statistics, just so that you know. 3 to 5% of Canadians are uninsured. Most people don't know that. They say, well, just wait, it's universal health care. No, everybody's not covered. In different provinces, they have 10 health plans, actually, one in each province. In some of the province, you actually have to pay a premium. If you don't file your taxes, you're not paying the premium, so you're technically not covered. And you can be turned away at the hospital. You can be turned back. If it's not life-threatening, you can be turned away. 17% of people do not have and cannot find a primary care physician. Okay? Coverage does not mean access. We want to cover everybody. Well, that's fine. They don't have access. I already talked about that. Okay, so how do Canadians get care? Well, there's the government free clinics, the walk-in clinics. There are the nurse, the telelines. Call the nurse, read your symptoms. There's lotteries sometimes to get a doctor. If you go to most major cities in Canada, and you could do this from here. You can look up the yellow pages. Call doctors. Call 100 doctors in Toronto. If you are lucky, 2 of them will say, I'm accepting new patients, but you have to come in for an interview. Why an interview? I have to see if you're healthy enough for me to take you. I don't want sick people. Okay? This happens. It's sad. And, of course, something that's very, very big is bribing the doctor. Okay? If you are fortunate enough to have a primary care physician, you take out an envelope, you stuff, $10, $100 bills and say, here you go, Dr. Smith. Anything you could do to expedite this would be really greatly appreciated. Okay? They can get you up there a little bit. When I was in Canada 3 weeks ago, I went to an orthopod and I went to a hospital and I told them, I'm from Nashville and I want a knee replacement. The orthopod didn't know what to do, so I went to the hospital. They gave me a list. Here's the per diem rates, $3,200 a day. That includes the operating room and, okay, well, I have to tell you though, I am Canadian, I just don't live here. Can I get the uninsured Canadian rate? No, you have to get your residence back if you want that. I said, okay, well, but I can get the out of country, yeah, okay. How long does it take? Well, normally if you're a resident, it would take a couple of years, but we can probably get you in 2 weeks if you're paying cash, okay? So, one day, Medibid will be shipping Americans to Canada for care. Could happen. And of course, many of the Canadians come here for care. They just have. I mean, I did. I had to. Okay. The other thing about my son, Rick, when just before we came here, just before we left Canada, he was hit by a car. He was riding his bicycle, no helmet. His head went through the windshield. He was on the pavement. He was taken emergency. He waited 3 hours, got an x-ray and was discharged. Okay? X-ray for head trauma. That was it. The closest CT or PET scan was 130 miles away. It was booked for 9 months. So nothing's broken. A couple of stitches. He'll be fine. Now, on top of the high tax rate in Canada, which, in some provinces as high as 55% in the top bracket, and the top bracket is, like when you hit about 60 grand, okay? On top of that, there's a 15% sales tax, but the hidden taxes, the cost of liquor, 12 bottles of beer will cost you about $30. Cheap bottle of wine will cost you about $16. There's only one national airline, Air Canada, which is kind of semi-government owned, cost you, on a really, really good seat sale to fly from Vancouver to Toronto, $700. Okay, Southwest, Seattle, New York is what, $250? Okay, so there's all these hidden, gasoline, of course, is about $6 a gallon. So there's all of these hidden taxes. And one of the biggest exports from British Columbia is marijuana. Okay, and they have decriminalized small portions. And my brother-in-law, my sister's a registered nurse and a registered psych nurse, and she's a socialist who owns 3 rental properties. Trying to make that step. And her husband is also a healthcare worker. He works with with handicapped people. And he just always has the perfect Canadian quote. The last time I was up there, he said, well, you know why they legalized pot? I said, no, why? He said, so we won't complain so much about the high taxes. Hey, did you hear they raised the taxes? No, yeah, pass the joint, man. Okay. Wait time to see the specialist. Some provinces about 35 weeks. And for ultrasound, 116 weeks, neurosurgery, 138 weeks to see an orthopod, 116 for neurosurgery, 35 for an ultrasound. Okay, these are the waiting times. Let me see here. MRI, a dog can get an MRI in 2 days. People, about 9 months. Here are some of the actual statistics on waiting lists, and we can see here I've circled some of, gynecology in Prince Edward Island, 33.8 weeks. Neurosurgery in New Brunswick, 116 weeks. Orthopedic surgery in Nova Scotia, 138 weeks. Urology in Newfoundland, 63 weeks. But recently, the government published what was acceptable wait times. And right now, 30% of the provinces are actually achieving the wait times 70% of the time. So they congratulated themselves. What a great job. 30% of us are making the wait times that we set, 70% of the times. Congratulations on almost achieving mediocrity. The uninsured, of course, when they go for care, they have to pay before they're even seen. And they don't get seen faster, but they have to pay as well. And these kinds of signs are coming up in hospitals, the rate schedules. Non-residents, $320. Uninsured Canadians, $150. This is just, to go to the ER. And like I say, they do turn people down. If you're uninsured, you got no money, you're not going to get in. In order to achieve socialism, and in my opinion, socialism is not a state that can last. That's why I talk about the journey through socialism, because it has to get through that. It can't stay there. What we're seeing here is a voyage through socialism towards fascism. Fascism is more sustainable, because you can control a small number of people that run monopolies much easier, okay? So in order to do that, you can't achieve socialism democratically. It starts democratically, okay, when you elect the leaders, but what they have to do is they have to turn people against each other. Social goals are first sold to people on the right and the left as utopian. The left talks about freedom as much as the right, okay, but it's freedom from having to work or having to worry, okay? On the right, it's a different kind of freedom. Now, another thing in British Columbia, just sort of a little anecdote, where my mother lives, you cannot put drywall, gypsum, in the garbage can. One of her neighbors put a piece the size of a clipboard in the garbage can. She wasn't going to go to the dump for this one piece. One of her neighbors turned her in, okay? And what they almost did was implant cameras in the garbage cans to catch people throwing away stuff that they shouldn't. Okay? They turned the people at each other, and we've heard, my mother grew up in Nazi Germany, where they turn child against parent, cousin against, neighbor. They turn people against each other. Okay. It ends up as, in coercion and totalitarianism. That's really how it ends up, and that's what we're seeing happening here. And we see Captain John Smith's edict in 1609, when he said, "He who does not work shall not eat," has been changed to "He who does not obey shall not eat." Okay? And that is the edict of socialism, with the end goal of fascism. In Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, of course, that's Jean Chrétien. The Prime Minister of Canada has more power than the leader of any other Western nation, because the Prime Minister is not elected, the Prime Minister is appointed. And then the Prime Minister appoints the senators and the judges, and the Prime Minister decides when the next election is going to be, as long as he has a majority government. If he has a minority, he can get a non-confidence vote. But if he has a majority, he decides when the next election is. So, of all the Western industrialized nations, the Canadian Prime Minister has the most power. One of the other things that people live in fear of in Canada is for their doctor to fire them. If you diagnose a patient and you say, here's the treatment that you need, and the patient has the audacity to say, well, can I get a second opinion? No, second opinions aren't covered. If that doctor fires you, you're blacklisted. You can't get another doctor. So they live in fear of their doctor firing them. And these doctors initially bought into the system, and now they're the cogs in the machine. So the other thing that has to be done to achieve socialism is winners and losers have to be chosen. That's been done in Canada many years ago. It's being done here right now. Okay? This administration has chosen for the winners the AMA, AARP, and FIB, who have endorsed their policies. Okay? So they're choosing the winners. Once they choose the winners, it's those entities that are allowed to get a monopoly position. The thing about the Canadian system, the Canadian people, is it's happened so slowly after so many years, and the expectations have been diminished to the point where they just really don't feel that they have control because they don't have a voice. There's no freedom of speech in Canada. There's no freedom to own property in Canada. There's no Second Amendment. There's no Eighth Amendment. There's no 10th Amendment. There's none of that. They didn't even have a constitution until 1987. 1987. Okay? So it's happened slowly, but it's happened surely. And this administration, continues to look at Canada for the model. So what do we need to do? Some of the things that we need to do is change our languaging, little subtle things in the way we talk, okay? One thing, one of the Fox News commentators said, and I jumped out of the seat. He said something about these people that were entitled to be buried at Arlington because they had served in this war. And I said, no. They're not entitled. They've earned the right. Okay, so we have to get rid of entitled. Nobody's entitled. You have to earn something, not be entitled. We have to change this concept, or we have to maintain the concept of individual rights over individual duties. Everybody in this group, somebody said it earlier, we need to educate our patients. We have a huge number out there. If we can gain their email addresses, send them monthly updates. Here's what's happening. Mobilize your patients. Tell them that, the government wants to regulate your health. Okay? Now, I meant to ask earlier, Dr. Krysko, I know you're from Canada. Anybody else from Canada originally? No Canadians in the crowd? Okay. Dr. Krysko wrote a book. He's a Canadian physician who left Canada for just these reasons that I'm talking about. He's a radiologist that read Atlas Shrugged and said, I've got to get out of here. And he's got a book that he's written, Health Reform, End of the American Revolution, that really explains it from a physician's perspective. This is almost a must for any physician to speak to your clients, to your patients, because you can explain from somebody who's been there and come back. Okay? We have to end this political correctness. We can't do it anymore. It's gone too far. It's gone over the end. And we've got to speak the truth. It's just the truth, that's all. I know there are people being persecuted for speaking the truth. Geert Wilders in the Netherlands is persecuted for speaking the truth, but we have to speak the truth. Because when the patients understand the truth, when they understand what's happening, not the politics, but the truth, then they will help us to win. And we've got to say no. We've got to say no. I'm not going to stand for this. I'm not going to let them do this to my patients. And I'm just going to end with a couple of quotes that we should all write down. One of my favorites, this was on my son's valedictorian plaque, Ayn Rand. In any compromise between food and poison, it's only death that can win. In any compromise between good and evil, it's only evil that can profit. The time for compromise is over. We need to stand up for the truth, for the principles. And neutrality in the face of evil is evil in itself. Thank you.